Uh, okay, I think all is fine. Yeah, okay. Hello, hi, dear guests. This is Sila Sönmez from International Center for Migration Policy Development, Turkey office. I work in this office as a program manager for asylum and refugees programs of ICMPD. I would like to apologize in advance for my terrible voice. I'm unfortunately quite ill, and I will be coughing throughout this interview. I'm so sorry, but I think during Corona times, this is something that everyone got used to. So hopefully it will not be a problem. Today, we're going to talk about asylum management systems, especially in Turkey, and digitalization. As you may know, Turkey had a rough time with the start of COVID-19 in the registration, refugee status determination, and resettlement of refugees. However, from August 2020 and on, some of these problems were passed over by actually using and utilizing online systems and the use of new technologies. So as of now, Turkey is able to register and conduct refugee status determination and resettlement through online systems with the assistance of new technologies. But we think this new trend in new technologies is going to increase in the next years. So this is why, as ICMPD, we collaborated with Professor Emre Eren Korkmaz from Oxford University to better understand the digitalization needs of Turkey and also the use of new technologies in other countries, such as United States, Canada, and many European Union countries, including Norway. And today we are also going to discuss about the study findings of this research. So I'm going to introduce Eren Hoca, as we say in Turkish, who works as a lecturer and researcher at Oxford University, and he's also affiliated with Oxford Center of Technology and Development, and who's also a dear professor of mine from years before. Welcome, Hocam. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I hope you will recover very soon.
Thank you. I hope so too. It's very nice to have you here today. I mean, as we all know about the difficulties of COVID-19 situation and also for refugees, I'm actually going to ask you to talk a little bit more about that, an intersection of COVID-19 and this report and how it was commissioned. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the study and your team first. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So thank you so much for organizing this event. I think this is a very important topic, and we are very happy to share our initial findings with you. So when this work is assigned to us, we aim to prepare an initial, feasibility report within 3 months. So we designed it as an introductory program, a report to a longer and larger project, because this is a very important topic that should be studied in a broader sense. But this report aims to show the picture in general. So we formed the research team with 5 researchers from the University of Oxford's migration program, and we aim to compare the digitalization efforts of migration management in Turkey, some selected EU states, Canada, and the US. We reviewed the literature and policy reports and conducted in-depth interviews with migration officials in all of these selected countries. But also in Turkey, we interviewed with DGMM officials, Digital Transformation Office of the Presidency, some NGOs, academics, and refugees. Some refugees from Afghan and Syrian nations. So how they use these existing systems, and we try to understand their recommendations. It's for sure this digital transformation is transforming all our life, all spheres of our life, and naturally it has an impact on the migration and asylum field as well. And however, in states, NGOs, and academy have provides some interest, very recently. So there has been so much literature and so much debates on the other aspects of the digital transformation, like future of work, future of warfare, cyber attacks, cyber democracy, privacy, human resources, ethics, and also, the discrimination, inequality provided by digital or frontier technologies, also about the surveillance business model. So there's so many debates around it, but we have the migration aspect is a bit understudied. However, it's also I can also confident to say that almost all these new technologies are employed in the migration management, from artificial intelligence to blockchain and big data analytics. So humanitarian NGOs, UN agencies, and states are experimenting these new technologies. And so I think it's important to, and it's necessary to discuss this digitalization and the impact of new technologies on migration management. And also maybe an advantage is learning from other fields. So we do not have to discover everything from the beginning, but we can learn a lot about how for these new technologies create digital divide, digital inequality, so we can understand its impact on the vulnerable populations. And maybe I can say, so there's an emerging interest on discussing these new technologies, but most of them are focusing on two main topics. One is the smart borders, how the new technologies are used to in the border management, and second is the digital identity for humanitarian emergencies and distribution of humanitarian aid. There are also so many discussions about the data collection, privacy, consent, what happens to data, where it is stored, and all this kind of stuff. But our topic in this report is focusing on the asylum processes. So it's also a new area of discussion. So we aim to contribute
Konusu da tartışmalara yeni kazandırılmış bir boyut. Dolayısıyla bütün bu tartışmalara raporumuzla katkı sağlamaya çalıştık. Evet, aslında bütün söyledikleriniz bana şiir gibi geliyor. Çok güzel bunları duymak. Evet, sizin de söylediğiniz gibi artık teknolojiyi hayatımızın her safhasında kullanıyoruz. İltica süreçleri de bunlardan bir tanesi. İşte hareketlerin izlenmesi, göçmenlerin izlenmesi, kaydedilmesi ve göçmenleri ve devleti ya da uluslararası örgütleri bir araya getiren sistemler, bunlar nasıl tasarlanabilir? Bütün bunlar tabii ki bizim de gündemimizde olan konular ve ICMPD olarak sizlerle bu ortaklığı geliştirmiş olmaktan büyük bir memnuniyet duyuyoruz ve Türkiye'nin de bu çalışmanın bir parçası olması gerçekten çok iyi bizim için. Çalışmanın bulguları hakkında, özellikle Türkiye kısmı hakkında biraz daha bilgi verebilir misiniz acaba bize? Evet, tabii ki verebilirim ama öncelikle dijital dönüşüm gerçekten Türkiye'de çok yoğun tartışılan bir konu başlığı haline geldi. Cumhurbaşkanlığı bünyesinde dijital dönüşüm merkezi kuruldu biliyorsunuz. Yapay zeka rehberleri ve yönetmelikleri çıkarıyorlar. Birçok üniversitede işbirliği içinde artık devletle dijital dönüşüm birçok yerden aslında desteklenmeye başlandı ve devlet yapısı içinde de aynen özel sektörde olduğu gibi dijital dönüşümün artık bir eğilim olduğunu görüyoruz. Göç İdaresi Genel Müdürlüğü içinde dijital dönüşüm ve hizmetlerin dijitalleştirilmesi öncelikli konulardan bir tanesi. Çünkü Göç İdaresi Genel Müdürlüğü Türkiye'de göçmenlere, iltica arayanlara hizmet veren bir kurum ve 4 milyondan fazla kişiye hizmet veriyor. Gerçekten çok yüksek bir sayı. Göç İdaresi Genel Müdürlüğü bir GöçNet isimli kapalı devre bir sistem kullanıyor. Bu aslında bir iç veri tabanı, kurum içi veri tabanı ve genel müdürlüğün personeli tarafından kullanılıyor. Göçle ilgili konularda bu sistemi kullanıyorlar ve bir mobil aplikasyon üzerinden, internet üzerinden de kullanılabiliyor. Dolayısıyla GöçNet üzerinden bazı çevrim içi hizmetler alınabiliyor. Elektronik randevu, elektronik viza ve Türkiye'de yaşamla ilgili çevrim içi bir rehber buradan sunuluyor. Göç İdaresi Genel Müdürlüğü, GöçNet dışında e-Devlet portalı üzerinden de bazı hizmetler sunuyor. Mesela geçici koruma, ikamet izni alma, uluslararası koruma, devlet vatansız kişiler, yol izinleri vesaire. Bunlar için başvurular e-Devlet üzerinden de yapılıyor. Genel müdürlük personeliyle görüştüğümüzde 8200 veri biriminin kişi başına alındığını gördük. Yani 4 milyon kişi olduğunu da düşünecek olursak ve kişi başına 8200 veri birimi alındığını düşünürsek bu inanılmaz yüksek bir veri hacmi olarak karşımıza çıkıyor. Dolayısıyla bu sürecin dijitalleştirilmesi genel müdürlük için gerçekten önemli bir başlangıç olacak. Göçmenlerle, sivil toplum örgütleriyle ve akademisyenlerle de konuştuğumuzda bunun yani dijital dönüşümün gerçekten çok olumlu bir gelişme olduğunu söylediler. Az önce bahsettiğim izinlerin, onayların internet üzerinden alınabilmesi insanların hayatını çok kolaylaştırmış. Genel müdürlük aynı zamanda sosyal medya hesaplarını da aktif bir şekilde kullanıyor. Bu da olumlu algılanıyor. Ama tabii ki bazı olumsuzluklar da var. Mesela Göç İdaresi Genel Müdürlüğü personelinin kapasite geliştirilmesi açısından biraz daha desteklenmesi gerekiyor ve başvuran kişilerin ve göçmenlerin dijital anlamda okuryazar olmaması da tabii ki büyük bir sorun. Göçmenlerin Türkçe bilmemesi başka bir sorun. İltica talebinde bulunanların ya da işte geçici koruma ya da uluslararası koruma altında olanların çoğu bu online hizmetleri kullanmak için üçüncü taraflara güveniyorlar. Çünkü hizmetlerde sunulan dili anlamıyorlar ya da araçları anlamıyorlar. Bu da tabii ki kişisel verilerin güvenliği ile ilgili bir sorun yaratıyor. Çünkü bu kişilerin verileri üçüncü tarafların eline rahat bir şekilde geçebiliyor ve kullanılabiliyor onlar tarafından. Dijitalleşme sürecini güçlendirmek için devlet tarafından yapılan çabaları da gördük ve bu çabaları desteklemek için bazı alanlar önerdik. Biraz isterseniz bunlardan bahsedebilirim. Tabii ki buyurun. Örneğin iltica talebinde bulunma süreci dijitalleştirilebilir. Genellikle iltica talepleri göç yönetimi il müdürlüklerine yapılıyor ve gerçekten çok fazla başvuru yapılıyor il müdürlüklerine. Kapasitenin geliştirilmesi için yenilikçi sistemler kullanılabilir ve kayıt süreci ve onay ve kabul süreci dijitalleştirilerek daha da kolaylaştırılabilir. Yine bütün başvuru sahipleri için bir başvuru sevk sistemi kullanılabilir. Dijitalleştirme, belgelerin güvenli bir şekilde depolanması ve işlenmesi için kullanılabilir. Çünkü çok fazla belge sisteme girildiği için bazen gecikmeler oluyor. Bu da tabii ki göçmenler için ve iltica talebinde bulunanlar için gecikmelere neden olabiliyor. Dijitalleşme ile ilgili diğer sorunların giderilmesi için yardım merkezleri kurulabilir ve tabii ki göçmenler açısından hukuk hizmetlerine başvurmak da büyük bir sorun. Çünkü arada büyük bir dil bariyeri var. Hukuki temsiliyet, yasal temsiliyet konusunda onlara destek olabilmek için dijital hizmetler güçlendirilebilir. Yine göçmenlerin yerel topluluklarla birlikte barışçıl bir şekilde yaşaması ve toplum hayatına uyum sağlayabilmesi için bu araçlar kullanılabilir. Yine mülteci popülasyonunun kendilerini temsil edebilecekleri bir alan olarak da dijital alanlar kullanılabilir. Çünkü yeterince temsil edilmiş hissetmiyorlar kendilerini. Sivil toplum örgütleri bu konuda çalışmalar yapsa da yeteri kadar...
Related to self-reliance and financial inclusion, we just completed another report on the financial inclusion of Syrian refugees. And like the commercial banks have and financial institutions have so many expectations from refugees in order to provide them loans or support their financial integration. So digitalization also would help to benefit from alternative data sources. Tracking and locating refugees is another issue because the people under international protections, they have a signature duty. So digitalization this and process might be a good idea. And last two suggestions are one of them is the digital identity for refugees. Digital identity has been discussed a lot in the humanitarian sector worldwide. There are so many initiatives. In Turkey, it has been started to this being discussed maybe very recently, but maybe this it can be discussed within the DGMM as well. You know, maybe a broader discussion can be facilitated, and also interagency cooperation and one creation of a platform for data gathering and information sharing is proposed mainly by the NGOs. Maybe, for example, to coordinate various social projects aiming to support refugees. But from UNHCR to NGOs and academics, they all consider about the huge workload of the DGMM. And so there we received so many very interesting recommendations, for example, to develop some kind of artificial intelligence algorithms for dialect recognition, face recognition type of issues. But now then maybe we will discuss this from the other country experiences. So it's important to learn from other countries what happens when these algorithms are developed in Canada or in the EU. I think it's important to learn from them because they might create some additional problems or unexpected problems as well. Yeah, so these are maybe some of the basic issues, so that we can provide a better protection environment where refugees increase their self-reliance and then integrate financial economic integration and social cohesion. So these are very important topics. Of course, digitalization is not a solution to them, but can help us to foster these processes and can help all the stakeholders to coordinate their efforts in an efficient way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So it's I'm just going to quickly comment on some of these things. I took notes and also having read your report. Like for instance, for registration in Turkey, the registration is before the COVID era. So now it is, some of them are, there are of course different modalities. But so in some countries, it is purely online, for instance. And the refugee self-registers themselves as an asylum seeker, and then they get an appointment date and others. Whereas in Turkey, for instance, we still often require physical presence. So this is maybe one area that is really quite important. In terms of referrals, in some systems, much like E-Devlet in Turkey, the referrals are almost automatic and the person can themselves, for instance, do it or ask for it. Whereas in the Turkish system, it needs to be asked by an official for you. And then the referral sometimes goes to somewhere else because the database is not big enough or the system doesn't involve many ministries. So that is also, I think, one of the issues that we saw. Documentation, of course, the storing of documentation, self-uploading, like how you would register to a website. Sometimes you need to upload things. So those are, certain things that can be done with, you may not even need artificial intelligence for these. And especially also with basic needs and essential services. As you said, the data collected for persons under temporary protection and international protection, it's massive. And of course, much of this registration data also entails some of the protection needs of course, people talk about these already at the registration phase. So maybe referrals for essential services, basic needs could be done through the use of new technologies. And the time that goes between, like the need and accessing the solution can actually be really shortened through the use of new technologies. Another part you said about access to legal aid, community participation, of course, these all, I know that you have very good examples from other countries, which we will talk about in a minute, but especially on tracking and monitoring of refugee movements. That is also quite important, both for national security, but also regional security, but also for asylum matters. So, and this could be maybe also done in an ethical way. So I also, before going through other questions, I also want to tell our viewers that if you have questions, I'm going to take them at the end of the session. I'm going to go through a couple of questions myself. And if you could please write your questions on the chat box, I'll be happy to ask these to Professor Eren a bit later on.
Yeah,
so,
maybe, yeah. So maybe just to summarize that, thanks for your notes. So, but maybe so the capacity building is a process. So the change of the culture in the bureaucracy is very important, and it's a process. But also the digital literacy of refugees. So it also has an impact on the projects related towards refugees. So they should understand and use these online sources in an efficient way. And as I said, this learning from others are very important, because there are so many discussions about the informed consent, privacy, and some unexpected issues related to human rights. So we do not have to repeat these things in each country. So learning from others are very important. So these three areas would help us to, so it's not just to buying a technological tools, a software, an algorithm, and employ it, but it takes a longer process. So that's important, and we understand this from other country experiences as well.
Yeah. So based on that, maybe we can first start with examples from United States and Canada, that you had very interesting examples throughout your study, and I know you and your team worked quite a lot on these two countries. Could you please tell us about your observations from Canada and the US? How do they use new technologies in asylum management?
Yeah, so we will discuss about these ethical and human rights related problems afterwards, but maybe I can start by saying that we are a bit critical about the cases in the US and Canada. Normally, in this part of the world, there are more attempts to use artificial intelligence and to automate decision-making processes. So there are so many projects related to it. So to incorporate AI-powered new and emerging technologies like automated decision-making systems and biometrics to support asylum-related processes. And it's believed that the US has been incorporating AI and other technologies into various governance practices at a much greater extent than Canada. So we can track these back to 2010. And mainly the US Department of Homeland Security and its agencies like Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Custom Enforcement, they are deploying these technologies. Some of these technologies are to surveil these migratory movements and then collecting as much as data as a result of these surveillance monitoring programs, and using this data to make automated decisions on migration and asylum related matters. Both countries also rely on biometrics, and they try to develop facial recognition technologies. In the US, we know that asylum seekers' social media and cell phone content are also used in the decisions, and there are so many problems and critics related to that. There are some attempts to create an automated virtual agent for truth assessment in a real-time avatar under the name of Avatar, which is a kind of a kiosk. It's a kiosk screen, and it asks, it conducts the primary and secondary screening of migrants and detecting changes of the eyes, voice, posture, gazes. It's a kind of a lie detector. But this is also criticized a lot about this, the human rights approach issues. For example, the European Union has a very different approach to these type of developments. So because one of the problems, maybe we will discuss it, but maybe I can also explain it now, that because any error on the system on asylum and refugee application can create huge problems for these individuals who need special protections because they are escaping war, violence, or persecution. And as a result of an error in the algorithm, they can be sent back and they can be exposed to inhuman treatment, torture, or punishment, or maybe they can lose their lives. So this is not that easy. So automation doesn't mean that it provides objective conclusions. So the human factor is very important. Even if you automate some parts of the process. And in the Canada, there are some attempts, but one of the problems or the most critical part of the projects is they are working with some cyber security and technology corporations who are very controversial. For example, like, for example, an United Arab Emirates-based company like Dark Matter or a Palantir, who were very criticized about their technology solutions. They can act as partners in the Canadian system. So that's also, choosing an algorithm is another issue, but also choosing your partners or technology providers is another an important issue. And also in the US, there is a more interest towards tracking or the analyzing the real-time data from social media accounts or the mobile phone data. So the US Customs and Border Protection is buying all these commercial databases, and then they are trying to track and understand the content of what people speak and message with each other. So these are some of the technologies maybe I can tell here, but most of them are receiving so much critics from human rights advocates and activists. So we will discuss these issues maybe later, but I need to mention, underline this a few times. Yeah.
No, of course, I totally understand. Like, I can already say, for instance, using technology for detecting lies. So actually, it has been proven that, like lying or certain facial use of, like mimics and or the voice or use of hand, for instance. I'm using my hands all the time. I just noticed it looking at the camera. For instance, all of these things, these are often very cultural. And it may have nothing to do with telling the truth or lying. You may have had a lot of trauma, and maybe that's why you're crying or you're not crying, or that's why you're looking up or down. So it is very difficult to detect these. And that's why, of course, there are, it paves the way for human rights violations. There's also use of social media or tracking people's movements through those. But there are also good examples that we can talk about, definitely from US and Canada, especially on artificial intelligence. You mentioned in Europe it is quite different. Can you a little bit tell us about the study findings from Europe? So I know, for instance, you had an interest in Germany, in Norway, and in a few other countries. Maybe you could give us some examples also from there.
Yeah, so maybe you said, the asylum seekers might not feel, they can feel stressed to answer, but this is maybe for all of us, for me, I also feel stressed when I speak with a border agent. When I come to the UK, they're asking so many questions. So that's not an easy issue. So in the European Union, there are some attempts to use artificial intelligence, but these are not to automate all the decision-making process. There are some legal obstacles as well, based on the GDPR regulation. But there are attempts to use AI and robotics to help border agents to receive more data. But there's also another way of way is to use databases more efficiently. So there are many local databases, national databases, and EU-wide databases. So there are attempts to, to help these databases to speak with each other. So that's an important issue. Of course, the problem here in the European Union is they are overwhelmed with these asylum applications. So at the end of 2020, there were almost 800,000 asylum applications. So maybe it's not good to compare it with Turkey, of course, but again, this is a huge number of pending applications, and so all these data, when we discuss about these databases, of course, there are also issues related to privacy of them. So how these databases, for local databases, regional databases of in a country, and their national databases, and how they can speak with EU-wide databases. These are the main issues. Then we also find out that these new innovative solutions to counter the COVID pandemic can be also used or can be planned to use afterwards to track and locate migrants and refugees, because now we are all using these applications to track our movements. So we are downloading them against the COVID pandemic, of course, but most probably we will observe similar applications in the post-pandemic period, and some of them will be used for asylum seekers to track their movements. For the machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms, of course, they are working very well to perform highly repetitive tasks. But every single asylum application is unique and it deserves an individual assessment. So in the European Union, the general aim is not to optimize all the system, but supporting certain aspects of refugee status determination. And also the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation also forbids to automate these processes. So data subjects shall have the right not to subject a decision based on solely automated processing, but there should be a human aspect here. Some countries also try some pilot projects. I should underline that these are all pilot projects. But for example, one interesting try was using machine learning to support the recognition of applicants' oral dialect. So to make assumptions on the applicant's probable country of origin. There's another project to use machine learning to support the transliteration of names from Arabic to the Latin alphabet. So this is a very important issue as well. And also, there are some attempts to use machine learning to support recognition of faces. So photographs that were taken to identify asylum seekers, but to check these photographs against databases or prevent double registration, the machine learning algorithm is checking photographs. There are also, maybe last I can say, there's some efforts, for example, from the European Asylum Support Office to use machine learning to forecast the future asylum trends in Europe by analyzing the event data. EU LISA receiving so many critics about their facial recognition tools to be used at the external borders of European Union, and similarly these lie detector type of projects could be funded, but these are the research projects, so they are supposed to be academic research projects, but we don't know if whether it will be deployed in the future. So maybe I can just summarize the general trends in the European Union about the areas of digitalization.
I think especially the last ones that you mentioned on dialect, for instance, that's quite interesting, because most often, also for our viewers, so during the refugee status determination phase, let's say you have someone who says they are coming from Somalia, and Somali language is spoken, but there are different dialects of Somali, for instance, depending on where you come from. And then maybe the person says they come from point A, but maybe the dialect specifically can identify that they are actually from point B. So it is quite important to understand where the person comes from, whether the events they mentioned has happened. So it could be, I think, quite revolutionary. I also think for languages like Arabic, that is spoken in, I think, around 19 countries all around the world. So for one person to say, okay, I'm coming from Iraq, and really from which region of Iraq, if the dialect recognition assists with that, that can be very helpful in determining where the person comes from.
But in these projects, maybe I can say, in these projects, these are deployed to support an expert linguist, for instance. Okay. So it's not totally automated until now. So it's a kind of because it's a pilot project, but so they try to understand how effective it is to help an expert.
Yeah, I think also, for instance, I really would like to see the pilot project results on transliteration from Arabic to Latin alphabet myself, having had to deal with the written version of name Muhammad, for instance. And I think you can write it, I heard, in over 27 ways. And that is so important to correctly register someone in a country where you use the Latin alphabet. So then, the person has an actual identity, and then it's the correct identity. So those are actually quite important, as well as forecasting trends based on the data that is collected. That's also massively important, I think. These all are really interesting prospects. So how do you think Turkey can benefit from some of these new technologies? What could be done in Turkey in terms of asylum management? What could be deployed here, whether it is feasible to use some of these, and maybe also what implications that Turkey would need to think about in terms of human rights, in terms of sustainability, in terms of data protection?
Yeah, so these are very important questions, and I think it's more important than the choice of technologies. So because, as I said, it's not just to find a technology provider and deploy these systems and teach staff how to use them, but there are so many other questions that we should answer. To summarize some of the areas, almost 12 areas that can be digitalized. So these are some of the options for the DGMM and maybe the NGOs and other organizations in the field that they can contribute from their perspectives. But first of all, I think it's very important to have a legal framework. So in Turkey, there is a lack of legal framework on the use of these technologies. So there should be there is a legal framework to deploy these before deploying these technologies, or this should be debated very well. With regard to the lack of legal framework, I think the national strategy and guidelines, so the approach of the countries is also very important. So there are some attempts under the Digital Transformation Office, and there are so many private initiatives and NGOs dealing with this, but this national strategy and legal framework are very important. So another issue is about, of course, we do not need to automate all the process, but there are some areas that the DGMM personnel can lose so much time, to deal with many issues, for example, related to country of origin or some other aspects that they have to answer. So these areas could, digital technologies can be used in these areas. So these areas should be defined very well, and some pilot projects can be conducted to overcome, to understand their impact. An important issue is about the fairness and the human rights aspects of, so it's the non-discrimination is very important. We should also consider the digital divide. So mostly, based on your age, gender, and class, your access to digital devices and digital technologies differ. So that's very important to have that in our minds. So if because of the class, gender, and age related issues, if people cannot access to some services, then we should find a solution. Another issue is about the consent. So the people should have right to know why that data is collected. We all know that in this area there is a kind of a very clear hierarchy between this, not just between the state and the applicant, but even between the humanitarian NGOs and the beneficiaries, that we have been discussing a lot these issues before. But the consent and informing people about the potential outcomes or the reasons of collecting that data is very important. Also the capacity building, but in a sense to change the organizational culture is very important. So it's not just to, as I said, not to deploy these technologies, and not just to teach how to use them, but that is a cultural and organizational cultural issue. So these should be debated very well. So the staff should know and should trust to these technologies, and the anonymization of this data and how this data is stored and protected, these are very important issues. There should be some regulations and procedures, when this data should be deleted, where these data, which data should be shared with which organizations, which way. So these are some of the questions that should have very clear guidelines. And again, with also maybe lastly with regard to the fairness, so we shouldn't reproduce the already existing discrimination and inequalities. So these solutions should solve some of these problems, should help solving some of these problems. So it's like I think it's important to employ this, or to lead this process in a transparent way, with maybe within taking recommendations or the opinions of the different stakeholders and also the refugees themselves. Of course, it's not just the NGOs or the UN agencies or the state, but it's the refugees and people under temporary and international protection in Turkey. And there are so many ways to take their consent and recommendations and learn from them. So there is a very big academic community in Turkey who have knowledge of all these issues and all the concerns, so, and there are so many NGOs working with refugees on the field. So their participation, their representation is very important. There are also so many refugee organizations that represent, that are some kind of grassroots organizations as well. So this would help us to discuss what the missing things are, or which areas should be resolved, and then digital technologies can be effective when these are very clear. So it's mainly related to the politics of it. So It's not just the technology itself, because if without such a preparation, without the improving digital literacy, without taking into account these human rights and fairness and discrimination issues, just using these technologies will not provide the expected results and might be even the loss of the citizens' tax money if they do not work well. Yeah.
No, I totally understand. I think it's very interesting, and thank you for explaining. Now I'm going to pose you a couple of questions that we received from some of our participants who are attendees who are watching us. So, for instance, could you please elaborate on the use of digital technologies in refugee status determination procedures? So is it just an online interview in other countries, for instance, or is it also in the actual decision-making that they use digital tools, or is it planned to be digitalized? They also, I think this question is also applicable to, if so, does DGMM have a timeline, for instance, in Turkey, to use artificial intelligence technologies for the decision-making?
So as far as we learned from the DGMM officials, that we are very grateful that they shared their opinions in a very deep sense. So we are very happy. So they were very transparent, and we received so many good questions from them. So try to answer them. So it was very good. So it was not just a one-way discussion, but it was a good dialogue. That helped us to, okay, we should look at these issues in other countries, so that will be useful for the practitioners. So, but as far as we know, there is no such a strategy, determined strategy to use AI technologies for decision making. So there have been some discussions and some study visits to understand the situations in other countries, but this is, the digitalization is maybe we can consider that it is still in the very beginning stage, as just a few of these services could be transferred to the e-state portal, and even they are digitalized still. People under temporary and international protection should speak or should go and visit the local DGMM office. So, of course, there are so many reasons that they should think about, for example, about the security reasons and other issues related to them. In other countries, again, in Canada, in the US, and in the European Union, these are still pilot projects, so these are not very developed as well. There are some attempts to use, to benefit from AI. Canada and the US, these North Americans are more tend to try automating all the process if it is possible. But in the European Union, because of the legal also requirements, it's not possible to automate all the decision-making process, but the aim is to deploy technologies to help agents, to help the staff, and then so they can evaluate each application in a better environment with more knowledge. So, but as I said, there are some research projects, some academic projects to at least creation of some avatars to discuss issues related with asylum seekers, but I'm not very sympathetic of these kind of solutions.
I understand. Okay, another question is related to your suggestions for improving the quality of online social services provided by NGOs in an innovative and interactive way within the sector of protection and social cohesion. What technologies are being used in that area, and what would be some of your suggestions?
Yeah, so in Turkey, there we are talking about almost 4 million people, so it's very high number. It's the highest in the world. But Turkey has a very, has some advantages. For example, there is a very robust legal system. There is a technological and financial infrastructure. There is a big industrial base, big agricultural base. So somehow people can find a solution. Both refugees and local people can find a solution to overcome some obstacles. And sometimes the legal frameworks like work permits are just following these solutions. Of course, this doesn't mean that people have serious problems in their lives, but there are more opportunities in Turkey, and there's also many NGOs and working very effectively to provide services to refugees, and some of them are very experienced. Is they are operating nationally, but they can be recognized as an international humanitarian NGO as well. And some of them are very local level, grassroots level organizations. So these are some advantages, but there are some issues that should be resolved as well to coordinate all these social projects is an important issue. I'm not talking about a more top-down approach, or to limit or control, surveil all the process, but in order to intensify the collaboration among stakeholders are very important. So, for example, some NGOs suggest that a kind of a library or a kind of a platform, online library or an online platform, so we can follow up which projects have been done, have been conducted in certain areas, then so they can have an information about that, so they can go and offer a new and better proposals there. So, and maybe these solutions, so there are also some attempts that we are also discussing in some other projects as well, to help refugees to represent themselves. So because there are hundred thousands of Syrians are, for example, in the formal education, so they are high school or university students and graduates. Most of them have the language capabilities. So we are not starting from zero, but maybe these online and innovative solutions, with the help of all the stakeholders on the ground, can help to empower refugees, and so they can represent themselves, so they can create value, and they can provide solutions easily. I think these advantages are very important. So maybe some innovative solutions to coordinate or to intensify all these efforts could be useful.
No, just to clarify here, I think that, for instance, in coordination, like we all know, 3RP in Turkey, so the regional plan, they have activity info, they have this other things, but that is usually for the use of donors and the use for reporting purposes. So that is an entirely different financial reporting infrastructure that is coordinated by the interagency office, and also international organizations, NGOs, everyone reports there. But a system, as you said, that there's an interface that the users can utilize. So not just the agencies and organizations, that is of course missing. Like, I haven't seen anything like that, and I'm quite, as you know, keen on these new technologies. So continuously looking, I think that would be wonderful. Another question that we have is about the report that you're conducting. If our attendees can access the report, I can answer that. So we are going to write down an executive summary of the findings. And usually, as ICMPD Turkey, we often publish a segment of our work also in our website. So that will be also available in the website. But certain specifics of the study will go to directly DGMM. So this is for their use. And having said this, I would like to thank you so much for bearing with us for a few months, and for conducting this study, and also attending this webinar. It has been wonderful to host you, and it has been wonderful to work with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are very happy and delighted to work with you, with the ICMPD team. So very hard-working team. So it's good when it was a great experience for us when we were asking some questions and when we wanted to interview some people in different countries, you could just solve it very immediately, and then we were very happy. It is overcoming these obstacles is not an easy thing in such a short period of time. So we are very happy to work with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And before closing off, I would like to remind everyone that at the beginning of March, we are going to have the next seminar by another colleague of mine on necessary conditions for socioeconomic integration and harmonization. So stay tuned, I would say. And thank you so much to all the participants. We hope to see you in our next seminar. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.